Today, I'd like to explain about double-click. Now, when implementing double-click in GameMaker, people don't know much about it because now usually there's not much use of double-click. Actually, if you're not the kind of person who researches and makes UI system like me, you may not have much awareness of these things, such as clicking the mouse at the position in which there is nothing to collide with, or you may not have enough experience dealing with UI system creation. So, the majority of game developers may not have the need for double clicking or the need to implement it. And there are cases where someone wants to implement it but cannot make it at all because of lack of awareness in some conceptual and basic part of this. So as I experienced this while developing UI or this site, for me, it is a little basic part that has been settled in the past, so I need to bring it out again and explain it. So I will give you an individual understanding first, and then I will proceed by implementing how to make it. There is a check button, there is a mouse check button press, and there is a mouse check button release. However, most people are confused or there are some parts that need some clarification of the overall concept. However, there are many people who do not understand why the manual explains it like that because the stereotypes of related concepts are fixed. So, in the case of the mouse check button pressed, it was just pressed. It checks whether the mouse has just been pressed, and in the case of mouse check button released, it checks whether the button has just been released. This itself is a correct expression, and there is no room for prejudice or error in this. Then it in itself is correct. But how do people take it when it comes to accepting a sentence like this is? Actually, then people think that now we can clearly distinguish between pressed and released, but in reality, it is not. Because this is the way people take it is to check whether the mouse was pressed at least once before, or whether the mouse was pressed or released at least once before. Here, just because it checks whether it was pressed once just before, it does not mean that we receive and use the return value that the previous action would have been exactly the one that was pressed. Just press the button on this mouse, press and release, press the left button, press the right button and release. This series of processes are repeated several times. Actually, when this function operates there, it is not like, as to say, the concept of the action state taken by the mouse immediately before is accumulated in a stack and that then it is pulled out from the stack or blah blah blah. That is, it does not return which actions were performed immediately before. It's basically not that concept. You may be wondering what I'm talking about now, but if I go a little further and explain it in detail, then you will understand what it is. I will move on to the next slide then now. So what I want to say is that people usually perceive it in this way. So the mouse remembers the most recent action taken, and after stacking these as steps, the most recent and last input here is popped in the form of a LIFO. In conclusion, this is not the case. The left mouse is pressed, the mouse is pressed right, the mouse is left released, the mouse is right released, the mouse does nothing, the mouse is in the middle of being pressed, and then is released. In this process, for example, when the mouse does nothing, without some basic criterion like time, this is in fact indistinguishable here. We have to measure the input that is not doing anything, but the mouse was pressed to the right or this was the previous action. So if you look at this here, it is not that it returns what the previous mouse action itself was like in this way. So this is not what system is like, and the key is that even if you make the distinction, if you want to distinguish between the mouse not doing anything and the mouse being pressed, in fact, you should consider the time itself as a key. So when I said the mouse was pressed, it can take as long as we are holding down because we are exactly matching the length of time we are holding down. But here, when the mouse is pressed once for a certain period of time for mouse pressing and released, the system will be in a state of recognizing this for a few seconds that the mouse has just been pressed. This is a very, very short time. We measure this over this duration. Same thing. Even when the mouse is released just before, but according to some rules inside GameMaker, it returns. I wrote this as an arbitrary standard 0.07 per seconds, but exactly we don't know exactly how much time GameMaker spends on this process. It does it doesn't even present it to us. It can be milliseconds or we measure it with in-game speed, room speed, or there are many ways, but the key is that this is what the mouse does for a certain period of time. It is stored as a press state, and after a certain period of time, they erase the value. It changes the value from 1 to 0. The same goes for the press state of the mouse. After a certain amount of time, it changes to 1 to 0 in this way. So the key is time. So if you look at this and think about a series of processes, the mouse is pressed, and then the mouse becomes a state while it is being pressed. And that's when you release the mouse. All mouse actions go through this sequence. The key point here is that people often get errors or misunderstandings by thinking that this action is checking whether the mouse is the most recent action because pressing and releasing in a series of processes will be separated in time. Because people get it wrong here, they don't develop using double click or overlapping various combinations, and they think it's a bit meaningless to use these together. In this way, there are cases where you cannot move from this to application due to a little misunderstanding or failure to develop your ideas further. On the contrary, when we develop something like UI, there are people who feel this intuitively or empirically and earn their own way, but they don't necessarily share all of them. But because it takes time, resources, and many other things just to develop their own game, it's not their duty to lecture on know how, it's because they do what they want to do anyway. I explained this to help you understand this overview before explaining how to implement DoubleClick. So the point is this. Here, there is just this and this and this and the order procedurally, but it is However, since this is in a state of being erased according to this timetable, there may be enough overlap between the time it takes to change from 1 to 0 after recognizing that the mouse has been released and the time it takes to change from 1 to 0 after recognizing that the mouse has just been pressed. You have to be aware of this to apply this or to use this. So for now, I will end the basic overview at this level. If I just explain the basics only, there will be a lot of people who don't feel what it means to reality, so I will show you and explain it myself. So this is the file I created before. I will try to create a new one. Then a new blank comes up. So here it is. I will make it like this. I'm making it. Create and object name will be OSystem and then create a create event. Here, you are asked what to choose between GML code and GML visual, and in my case, I will now explain with GML code. You can choose what you like here. And first of all, before creating, I will put this system in the room first. I will put it in, and how will you write in it in create? First, set the click to 0 and double click to first. It creates a variable called double click. Most of these clicks would have been made without knowing the concept I explained earlier, but there are many cases where many people make errors. I will show you as an exercise on the screen, but it's like this. First of all, I'm going to create this internally loading alarm by creating the concept of click time. So we need to be able to measure this time. We create our own time, and when the interval with the release time passes, release will be changed from 1 to 0. That is, the release is no longer recognized. That is, there is a timing when it is not considered as a release and disappears after a certain timing. We set the interval and we set the scale. And we set the scale. So this is what we arbitrarily decide. We don't know exactly what went on inside the game. So you can think of it like this. We will make the whole system. Then time is 0. The time is 0. You could set it like this. And this is a negative in the sense that there is nothing right now. And the list itself also needs to be recorded and reflected. That's how it is. Roughly, the concept looks like this. It goes like this. Then let's go to the step event. Oh, it's a bit inconvenient that the control can be expanded like this, but I'm not familiar with this, so if anyone knows how to solve it, it would be nice if you could tell me. So if you think about how to write the alarm in step events, you need to specify the click time first. But if you set this to 60, it's too short. So this is because the reason why we are limiting the restoring click time is that even if this variable itself becomes too large, a stack overflow will not come out anymore. So it is a concept of limiting the restoring integer so that it does not become too large. So I'm going to set this to 600 for now, but actually I will set it to a larger integer later. Anyway, mouse check button. That's right. Press ambient left now. Uh, Usually everyone will implement it without difficulty from here to clicking. So it will be solved by implementing a total of 2 clicks. You probably think this way. And we now have to create a list related events, but what will people who don't know the concept explained earlier do? First of all, there are people who do not use the list. Uh, uh, First of all, it took too long to explain all the cases. Therefore, I will just write down the code for when the mouse is released, and I will explain a little bit about what mistakes people usually make. It goes like this. This is how it works. So I set the release to true and record the time when it is released. When released, X is recorded and Y is recorded. But usually people don't do that. I will just do it like this for now. And if double click becomes true, most people will do this. But so I'm going to put this in the form of showing it as a show message here. Through the message, double click. I'm going to show you like this. How are you going to implement it? Wait a minute, I accidentally closed this. I'm going to do this, but let's restore the click variable here. After the double click is displayed, make this state first and release it again to first. And reset the release time back to its original state, and finally change the double click to first. And what about the way normal people do it? They don't know these concepts well, so at first trial, people just read what is written in the manual, and from there, they don't think about what kind of image it has in detail. And ordinary people approach it with this concept, as I explained earlier. So, since this is the most recent one, it will be reflected, so why not? Like so. It keeps happening here. Anyway, if you roughly think about what they do, you can explain it like this. They think it's going to be this way. That's right. That's right. This itself may be a bit like that, but if they think that it's caught in here, they may try to implement it like this. Here, you may not do this stuff here, like when the click is 2, it will now be a double click. Well, they will think this way, and well, those who are a little more logical, they'll might set click when condition is like this also. I mean, what do they think? So let's see what happens if we play this as this code. That's what happens. So even if it doesn't have anything to do with it, if you click it twice, it looks like a double click. It's practically nothing. You can just press it twice, so the double click that we want is not like this. So you can't restrict the double click for the case which is not clicked on same position. Even when I move it to another location, it becomes a double click. So usually people will become like this, so they just get satisfied here, or they don't understand well. They think there's something mysterious about GameMaker now. Think about it like this. There are people who think that it can't be accomplished. The concept that I explained before is to explain things like this more easily. So I made that presentation files. Fundamentally, the stereotype of them is basically too fixed. They think like this and this right way. So they assume the system remembers the last mouse movement and then converts to data. It's like pulling something out of a stack. There's misunderstanding and there's an error and you can't make it properly. Then so they shouldn't go from here to this idea, and so to speak, from here they are wrong. They are wrong. If you want to find a location, you can't do it this way. So what they comment is basically like, when I look at the manual, I think it's going to be exactly like that, but it doesn't work. So if he offers something, it's in this X position. He wonders if it overlapped or not, and he writes the cases like click equals to 1, mx1 is like this, my1 is like this, mx2 is like this, or mx1, mx2, mi2, blah blah blah. He is going to return the mouse position value, but if it's like this, you will get it from the step check the mouse X and mouse Y anyway. So there's no difference between this mouse position and that mouse position. Anyway, system can't reflect the difference, so he can't implement double click. Now I will show how to implement the time second concept that I've explained before. There's click time variable, so I'm going to subtract the release time from it. Then it becomes a big because the click time continues to flow here. That's right, the restoration will be like this, but right now I'm not going to explain it like this. I'm going to make this more concrete, but I will explain it to you first. If you subtract the release time from the click time, and the scale is larger than the release metrics, the released state is no longer recognized as well. So you can just do it as it was restored here. Except for getting rid of double click. You can do it like this. There's no difference. Uh, this is it. And what happens here is that if I do this here, what's the problem? People who are a bit logical will think like this. For example, it's 600 seconds, so maybe a little bit complex. So if it's 60 seconds, we should consider late problems when the click becomes zero also. It shouldn't be too big. If it's bigger than this, you have to make it go back to normal. That's right, we should develop it more. In my case, I'm going to increase the size and make it 6 million, and then number of iterations itself will go around very little. And when you make the click time to zero, you don't just have to do it right away. It's going to be bigger than this, so when you make it less, that's when I got to do the moves. Then when we hit 6 million, it doesn't go over that way. That's right, if the release time is bigger than this, to say, when this released state changes from 1 to 0 because it becomes larger than the matrix we had set, the click time should be 0. That's why I made it so that there's no error between them. If you do it like this, there is no overlap, so there is no problem there. So over 6 million, it's going to go over from 15 to 30 also. So it doesn't really matter. And here, basically, and here, I'm going to make it a little bit more concrete. You can't just do it here. You have to make a double click here. If it's released, in order to overlap here, we have to return the released state here that it was just released. That's why I went through this whole process. So if it's right that it's just released before, then standard time matrix of this just before is the variable we set released time matrix. So we did it within this period just now, and if released is still true, then this goes in. So when you return the released and the pressed is returned next, then this is a double click. We are going to make the system to recognize it. You can say it's overlapping or combination. So the fact that you know how to do this and the concept that overlaps and things like this is basically means the direction itself is different from before. So this itself can be make a big difference. It's something that you will eventually feel while developing UI and things like that, but you will experience it while having less trouble by watching this lecture here. But you won't get the whole experience even if I expand it now. If you try this, there will be parts where you can understand what I was saying. Anyway, this aspect of double-click and UI so far, so there aren't many lectures or videos so far. So I'm talking about this for the first time as a GameMaker developer. Well, maybe I researched last. So maybe. And so it's the release here to take out the release time from the click time. It's about half less than 7. If the time is low enough, it will make you double click to get on base. There's a part that needs to be fixed, but well, for now it's fine. I think it's going to work, right? That's right. Would it have position problem? No, it's not. You can only do it right before here, or just a little bit. You can only do it when you are barely moving. If I do this quickly, it can happen once in a while, maybe, barely, but well, for the most, it doesn't work like this. Is it because of the time? Yes. Anyway, here's a reason why I set this time as 7 seconds. Let me explain. What if I change it to 10 seconds? If I change it to 10 seconds, you'd get what we explained earlier. It's the same phenomenon as this. There's a bit of a difference even if you are far away. This can be measured even if the location is slightly different. That's right. So it doesn't fit the concept of the double click what we want. Because even if the distance is high, it recognizes as a double click. It should be double click only at times like this. So you can double click even if you go far. The reason why you have to do it like this is because there's this gap. Basically, it's a pressed interval, so even if you go far, the interval is recognized. Even if you click from far away, it's recognized because it's within the right timing. If you reduce it to 7, it's much less. Since it goes in half, the matrix is 15, so when it's about half, I think mouse is not working well. But since it's Bluetooth anti-noise mouse, there must be a slight difference. But yeah, I can't do this. Unlike before, the rest time I allocate, it appears less. No way. That's right. This is basically the basic principle of double click using time seconds because you have to be very, very accurate to double click in this case. And since this is too short, I will set it to 7 seconds and we want to be very accurate, when we measure the position of the mouse, right? So since we have recorded release X here, we can compare the difference with mouse X, which is continuously recorded in the current step event, and then we can precisely limit the position. Let's subtract released X from mouse X and say this is smaller than this. Right? Yeah, that's the case. And the released Y from mouse Y. Hold on. Apps returns about absolute value, so it's an absolute value function. So I'm going to set this absolute values are less than this, and then it's going to be work only when very little movement occurs. only when the difference is very small. It's perfect. Uh, it's going to be double click only at the right position if you look here. Before, when it was 7 seconds, it sometimes occurred like this. If you press it quickly, uh-oh, this happens sometimes. So this, hold on. Yes. Anyway, you have to press it like this. And basic parts are like this. But if you don't think about it, you have to understand the concept of overlapping these basic systems with steps before. You can also infer about overlapping times, but if you don't think about it, no matter how many times you press it twice, such as you make an MX1, MX, also it's meaningless thing. The system keeps reading on mouse position anyway, so in this overlap situation, you have to be able to catch the overlapping and interpret it, and in that part a little bit, I explained it to you. So we now have a general understanding of how to double click. Uh, so I've explained how to make it. I will make an example of this and upload it. Uh, if there's anything you don't understand while watching it, please ask me questions and thank you for watching the video.